How's it going, guys? It's the final render here, and today we're going to be doing some speculative discussion about the new Bethesda Game Studios game, Starfield, which is due to be announced at the next E3 in 2018 and released some point this year. So how do we know that Starfield, the space opera RPG, is going to be the next game by Bethesda Game Studios? Well, we know this for a few reasons, one of which is that the name Starfield was trademarked by ZeniMax Media back in 2016 and was renewed just maybe 10 days ago prior to the recording of this video. And there's nothing too ridiculous about going ahead and renewing a trademark detail. In fact, companies have to do that all the time in order to keep their intellectual property protected. Even if they don't intend to actually use that trademark for a long time, you still need to go ahead and renew the trademark so that no one else can go ahead and take that trademark from you. So how do we know that this is the next game by Bethesda Game Studios rather than one of the other companies owned by ZeniMax Media, such as id Software, who made Doom and Wolfenstein, or Tango Gamesworks, who made games like The Evil Within? Well, we can assume it is the next game by Bethesda Game Studios because we know through interviews that they started working on a brand new project as soon as Fallout 4 was done. As soon as Fallout 4 was done and all of its DLC was kind of halfway through production, they began working pre-production on their next game, which we believe is this new Starfield game. One of the reasons we suspect Starfield could be the next one, other than the fact that Bethesda themselves have said they would quite like to make a space game, is because that is just the way the industry is naturally going. Not only has RPGs always had a lot of success with the space genre, look at BioWare's Mass Effect as a very good example, but also other games such as Titanfall have been very popular, Call of Duty went into space, No Man's Sky, Elite Dangerous, Star Citizen. There are lots of games about space that are very popular at the minute. And that's mostly because of pop culture. We've got things like SpaceX going on right now, and there have been lots of successful Hollywood movies about space, such as Gravity, Guardians of the Galaxy, The Martian, etc. So I'm willing to say that people are probably more excited about space exploration now than they have been for maybe the last 40 or 50 years or so since the Cold War. But final render, you may say across the room. That's mostly just speculation. What about some actual evidence or quotes to suggest that this may be the actual case? Well, there was actually a very big leak on Reddit just the other day, and whilst we can't actually confirm ourselves that the sources are correct, there have been various news outlets which have confirmed the sources to being within Bethesda Game Studios, but obviously those news networks can't let us know who they are in order to go ahead and protect their own job security. So therefore, we gotta take it with a grain of salt because we don't actually see a name on the article, but we just got to take the news site's word for it that they have checked it and they believe that the person who leaked it is who they say they are. That doesn't mean the information is true. It just means they believe the person who gave them the information does in fact work at Bethesda. So, what were some of the leaks that they gave us? So let's look at some of the information in this leak. This is from the user The Unknown Regions, and it is going to be taken with a grain of salt because it is a leak, but let's go. The first line of the leak says, heads of Bethesda have noticed a rise in science fiction influenced content in the market, not just in the video games market, and they want to make their own game in this genre. They've always wanted to do this, even Todd Howard has. They want to get ahead of games like Elite Dangerous, Star Citizen, and Beyond Good and Evil 2. They want to bundle a lot of their previous sci-fi ideas into this game. The game is in fact called Starfield. So yeah, that kind of backs up our assumption that Bethesda are aware of the fact that sci-fi content is trending in the public right now, and they want to go ahead and make something of their own ideas in the sci-fi genre while it's popular in the market. Makes perfect sense. It's more like a space fantasy or opera setting instead of a harder science fiction. It's like Star Wars, so there are fantasy themes in there, and they have naturally transferred over from their previous work. Very good idea to go ahead and do this. Sci-fi can be very hard to convince new people to jump in because often the lore is very dense and very thick, but kind of sci-fi which is set more in a fantasy genre tends to work very well. Again, things like Mass Effect, for example, have proven that kind of using the same kind of tropes as fantasy does work very well in science fiction. The next line of the leak is very interesting indeed. It says, you can make your own character. The game looks a lot like Fallout 4, but the animations aren't as janky. You can even climb on buildings and terrain from a skill even. Now, making your own character in a Bethesda RPG, that's nothing too unusual. You know, most of them have had that. That's nothing new. We're not too surprised about that. but the fact that there is a new animation system in there. This is very interesting because in a recent interview with Ted Price from Insomniac Games for The Game Maker's Notebook, which is an interesting podcast which I definitely recommend you go ahead and take a listen to, you can actually go ahead and hear Todd Howard say that they have been working on a brand new animation system for their game. So this kind of does make sense. But that being said, you can actually hear Todd Howard mention that the new animation system is for a game which is in pre-production, not the one which is in full production. And presumably the one in full production would be this Starfield one if it is coming out this year.
You know, take an animation system change that we're doing right now. We're finishing for one of our projects, though that's a project that's in pre-production, getting a new animation system, whereas the one that's in full production is using the old one.
And now the next 4 or 5 lines of the leak started to make people get very nervous indeed when they read them. This game will use cutting-edge procedural generation technology. A lot of the game mechanics rely on it. There are 4 important planets in the game that you can travel between in a system. 3 of them have procedurally generated terrain and are fully sized. The other one has a big city planet which is the set size of a map, maybe around the size of Morrowind's map. On the galaxy map there is a section called the Unknown Regions where there are endless planets that are generated that you can explore that are fully sized. The planets in of themselves are described as planet-sized dungeons. Content on the planet is procedurally generated, as well as alien species, animals, and locations. All of it is generated. You can find things as small as a camp to something the size of a colony or a city on the planet's surface. A city as in a Skyrim-sized city. There is a unique mechanic in the exploration side of the gameplay that allow you to discover a sapient alien species and then catalogue it and successfully return the information to normal space, the 4-system starting area. You unlock that species as playable for future characters. And this made people very nervous because they immediately got No Man's Sky vibes out of this. And No Man's Sky, you started to see the flaws in the procedural generation after about an hour in. You started to see the repetitive nature of it. And it completely broke the immersion of the game. And people really don't want that for Starfield. And making planets and stuff with procedural generation actually isn't that bad. Elite Dangerous has an entire galaxy of explorable planets, many of which you can land on. And it's done very, very well. However, the problem I'm starting to think with this is obviously the planets, the camps, and also the creatures that are procedurally generated. That could cause a lot of problems. No Man's Sky, you started to see creatures which were just kind of weird amalgamations of each other, just kind of random limbs attached. It kind of looked almost like a kid with a Lego set who gets all the pieces wrong. And it became more laughable than it became serious. And also with the camps and the colonies and the cities aboard the planets. Really, realistically speaking, one of the reasons why people love Fallout 4 is because pretty much every room you go into is really dense and really planned. Sure, you see the same shelves and the same things on the shelves, but there is so much of it, and many of the rooms actually have their own little unique stories in there because it was made by a human being. It makes the world much more believable, and you could lose a lot of that with the procedural generation of it. But that being said, though, they have also said that the kind of main planets in there are going to be handmade, so therefore that would be okay, but it's only with the procedural generated areas inside this unknown region, which would be procedurally generated, the kind of random dungeons. And of course, Bethesda games have experimented with procedural generation, such as a lot of the trees, foliage, are actually made with procedural generation. And not only that, but if you look back to Fallout 4, they had a procedural generation with the weapon system in there, and also the missions. So, you know, you've got the Radiant Quest from the Minutemen, you've also got all the random legendary weapons. Now, it is possible to kind of go ahead and do this kind of procedural generation and have it be less noticeable. A very good example of this is Borderlands with its weapon system, being that you have a set amount of weapons, however they've all got different stats, they've all got different kind of special effects as well, and it's not as noticeable as seeing the same kind of animal head on a different animal body that you saw from a few planets ago. So, take it with a grain of salt. Procedural generation is very clever technology, but it can actually go ahead and become very unimmersive if you start to see between the cracks. So we'll start to take it with a grain of salt, but look forward to some hopefully really good procedural generation from Starfield. Hopefully. One of the lines which is very interesting is the idea that you can discover certain alien species and then you can unlock them for playable future characters. I don't really know if I believe this one because it just seems a bit silly in a way. So for argument's sake, if you land on a planet and you find a brand new alien race, In your second playthrough of the game, you can then choose to play as that race should you want to. Very bizarre. Let's for argument's sake look at some of the races of Skyrim. Let's pretend that, say, Elsewhere was a planet rather than a continent or a country, and the planet Elsewhere had the Khajiit on them. If you discovered that species, you could then play as a Khajiit in your second playthrough. It just seems a bit weird to me. It just seems a bit weird. I don't really see why you would go to the effort to make such a mechanic. Why not just make the species available from the get-go? But presumably at the start of the game you would have humans and maybe one or two other alien races, maybe androids or something. So I can see the appeal of wanting to discover a brand new species so you can play as them, but it just seems a bit silly to me. So the next part of the leak reads that your character is silent and the character is not anyone special. I'm totally in favour of this. I know I keep going back to this as an example, but in Elite Dangerous, you are just a part of the universe. You are not the hero of the universe, and it feels very immersive, especially when you and the other online players complete a community goal. You feel like you are a part of the game, and it's great for RPGs because you are just one part of the entire universe rather than the hero and the savior. So it's really cool, and obviously it's the exact opposite of the Fallout 4 approach where you were the hero of the world and you had a voice protagonist, so you couldn't put your own personality onto the character. So very good choice to go ahead and do this for the sake of the RP-ness of this, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it will go. You choose what planet you want to start the game on. You can also choose a random planet which will spawn you on a generated planet in the unknown regions. This is very similar to No Man's Sky, being that it just kind of plopped you onto a random planet at the very start of the game. Didn't really matter too much because you'd typically leave that planet very quickly, but it's an interesting idea nonetheless. There are a lot of ships to buy, probably around 30. They can be from the size of an X-Wing to an Imperial-like cruiser. You can have a small crew, but I do not know the mechanics of this. Okay, once again, we're going to have to go back to Elite Dangerous on this. With Elite Dangerous, you had a pretty good number of ships, all varying in size, and they did have a multi-crew mechanic in there, being that you could get some of your online friends to, say, man the guns of the ship, or be ready in the fighter bay to launch your own fighters. Or, of course, you could go ahead and get AI ones to go ahead and control all of your manable guns on your ship. So this is something they could do for the crew aspect of it. And the idea that there are 30 ships, that's a lot of ships to go ahead and make. But that being said, ships are one of the best things about space games. You can't have space games without ships, so I'm not too surprised to go ahead and see such a large number of ships. As long as there is some really good variety in there, and they're not too similar to each other, then I'm totally in favour of having this number of ships. The combat is very similar to Fallout 4, but will have a better cover mechanic. So not only does this kind of confirm that we will have ships in there, but also means we will have land-based combat as well. So you will be able to leave your ship and walk around on the planet, similar to No Man's Sky or Star Citizen, and you can also do combat, presumably, in space as well. This is a fantastic idea, I love this, and it says it has a better cover mechanic. So this could mean that you can play the game in both third and first person as well, because obviously piloting a ship in first person is one of the joys of a space game, to go in and see all the controls in front of you. And also combat can be much better in third person if it's got a decent cover based mechanic. But that being said, you could still go ahead and use a cover based mechanic in first person. Maybe it swaps you back and forth, very similar to, say, Deus Ex, for example, where it was mostly first person, but when you went into cover, it went into third person. Again, all possibilities. And here is something which kind of confirms what I said earlier. There are infinite weapons comparable to the Borderlands system of guns. There are melee weapons too. So yes, part of the procedural generation of the game will be making new weapons, but that being said, a lot of the weapons will probably have the same models, they'll just maybe be a different colour, or have a different attachment, and mostly have different stats. I'm okay with this, but it didn't really make too much difference in the end, really, with the Fallout 4 system. Say you found a legendary weapon, it was like, ultimately, I didn't really care about what the legendary effect was, I just used it because it was a hunting rifle. I didn't care that it was a hunting rifle which also crippled limbs. I just used it for its base mechanics, so that's probably going to be very similar here as well. Next up, we can see the settlement system is expanded. You can establish colonies on an empty plot of land on any planet. You can establish colonies in the unknown planets and populate them for income. There are some ground vehicles like speeders and some transports, but nothing too large. There is nothing bigger than a garbage truck. And there are factions, but they can be procedurally generated because of the unknown region mechanic and what you can find in that area. You can also make your own faction. You can't just join every faction, but you can be in multiple factions at once. Okay, so a colony system being on all the planets. Obviously here on the Final Render channel, we love the settlement system in Fallout 4. We love building in games, and this could be very, very good. It really could. And there actually was a colony building system that was thrown into No Man's Sky, so you could go ahead and land on a planet and start building your own little base in there. I don't really know how well it will really turn out, because something I've found with a lot of procedural generated games is that since there's so much to do and so much to explore, it's very hard to kind of want to keep going back to the same planet. It's almost easier to just keep moving forward, but we'll see how it is. It might be an idea to go ahead and build a really good colony on one of the 4 starting planets, which are a bit more built around the main story. That might be a very good idea. But that being said, I do like the idea of building my own little cities and towns and stuff on other planets. I think that is very, very cool. And there is also vehicles like speeders, transports, but nothing too large. Again, things like No Man's Sky did have little rovers, and Elite Dangerous does have a rover that you can deploy out of your spaceship. It's always great fun to go ahead and drive around on these planets, and I'm totally in favour with this idea. And there are factions, and they can be procedurally generated, but because of the unknown region mechanic you can find in the area, you can also make your own faction. I don't really know how this is going to turn out, because in games like Elite Dangerous, for example, there are randomly generated factions, but because there are randomly generated factions, you almost care for none of them, because there are just so many. It's like you'll go on one planet, you'll find a faction, you'll do 1 or 2 missions, but then you'll just move on and never see them again. Sure, you can feel good in your heart knowing that you made that planet's colony a little bit better, but ultimately, you never see them again. And it is true that, again, in Elite Dangerous, there are things like the Empire and the Alliance, which are kind of galaxy-wide factions, but again, it really doesn't make that much difference who you side with. You kind of dip in and out. So, they are going to have to do mechanics that are a little bit different to some of the other popular space RPG games that are out there, but who knows, maybe I'm completely wrong, maybe it'll be a fantastic overhaul of the entire faction system we see in games, and it will be amazing. So that was obviously some great information about Starfield. Obviously it is a leak, so we do have to take it with a grain of salt. News outlets do believe that the person who leaked the information is who they say they are. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the information the person was given is correct. I do personally believe that if this leak is genuine, it is from Bethesda and is a deliberate leak rather than somebody taking the information from Bethesda. Because typically if someone took the information, then there would also be some negative information in there, like Starfield will ship with Day 1 DLC and an extortionate season pass. You know what I'm saying? There's no negativeness in there. So I think if the information is genuine, it comes from Bethesda and is being deliberately leaked from Bethesda rather than accidentally being leaked by a disgruntled employee. Or maybe it's just made up. I don't know. Could be an excited fan since it's all positive. And we do have reason to believe why it may also be announced this year, because a lot of people did speculate that it was going to be announced at the last E3. Not this one, but the last one, due to the huge amounts of stars in the background and a kind of overall space theme to the entire presentation. However, maybe they pulled it out in order to go ahead and show it this year. So then they can go ahead and pull a Fallout 4 and say, and the game is out in 3 months. They could probably go ahead and do that this year, but a year ago, maybe the game wasn't polished enough to do that. But it's all very interesting. I do personally really look forward to Starfield, if it exists at all, and if it is anything like the game that has been described, I'm really looking forward to it. I love space games, I love RPGs, and obviously we love Bethesda content here on the channel, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what this game could be, if it exists at all, and if not, hopefully we go ahead and get something fantastic at this E3 anyway. So guys, that was me discussing some of the leaks and rumours around Starfield. I hope you've enjoyed it. Remember to check out all the cool Patreon people in the description below who have supported the channel with their financial donations. You lot, of course, can go ahead and do the same. And let me know what you think about Starfield. Do you think it will be everything that the leak says it is going to be? Do you even think it exists at all? A lot of people may say that Bethesda Game Studios aren't necessarily going to take on a new IP because they're too busy with Fallout and Elder Scrolls, but who knows? Maybe we're wrong. So let me know what you think about Starfield, let me know if you even think it's true, and I'll see you in the next video. This has been the final render, and you've been the audience. Until next time, farewell.